What if the person you trusted the most, the one you thought would never betray you, has been hiding a dark secret right under your nose for years? A secret that could destroy everything. His wife had an affair with his own brother, but he never knew. What would you do if you found out? Don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment on how you would handle this situation. For John, life had always been about family. He had built a successful career, provided for his wife, Lily, and their two children, and lived in a house filled with love. John prided himself on being a devoted husband and father. His brother, Mark, was his best friend, his confidant, someone he trusted without question. The two of them had been inseparable since childhood, sharing not only the same blood but also the same dreams. They both married in their late 20s, and although they led different lives, their bond never wavered. John and Lily's marriage appeared to be perfect from the outside. They had met in college, fallen deeply in love, and quickly settled into a life of comfort and routine. They were the couple everyone admired, always together, always supporting each other. Lily was loving, caring, and a perfect match for John. But beneath this facade of happiness, there were subtle cracks. John noticed that Lily had grown distant over the years. It started slowly. Small arguments over insignificant things, a lack of affection, and missed moments of connection. John attributed it to the pressures of raising kids and maintaining a busy life, but deep down, he knew something was off. Mark, on the other hand, remained a constant in his life. He and Lily were always close, too, but John never thought twice about their relationship. They had a bond that was almost as strong as the one John shared with Mark, and he always trusted his brother. Despite their strained relationship, John never imagined that the source of the distance between him and his wife was a betrayal so deep. His brother, Mark, had been more than just a confidant for Lily. He had become her lover. The affair began innocently, at least in Lily's mind. Mark had been there for her in moments of loneliness and doubt, offering comfort and support that John couldn't. They had both been in vulnerable places at different times in their lives, and what started as emotional support soon turned into something more. For years, they maintained a secret that, in Lily's mind, felt like an escape from the increasingly cold marriage she was trapped in. What started as a simple kiss turned into late-night meetings and passionate encounters, all behind John's back. The guilt that Lily carried was heavy, but her feelings for Mark were undeniable. She rationalized it to herself. She loved John, but Mark made her feel desired and seen in ways that John had failed to. Over time, she found herself falling deeper into the affair, caught between two men who couldn't be more different. Mark was wild and spontaneous, the complete opposite of John's predictable, steady presence. It was an escape she couldn't stop. John remained oblivious, even as the signs began to show. The late nights, the missing phone calls, the strange behavior, he chalked it all up to stress. It wasn't until one fateful day, years into the affair, that everything came crashing down. The truth about the betrayal was about to come out, and when it did, it would shatter John's world in ways he couldn't even imagine. John's suspicions had been quietly growing over the past few months. His wife, Lily, seemed even more distant than usual. She was often on her phone, her conversations curt, and she seemed to pull away whenever John tried to initiate any meaningful conversations. But it wasn't until the night of their anniversary that John's world truly began to crumble. They had planned a quiet evening, just the two of them, to rekindle their relationship. They were supposed to enjoy dinner together, but Lily was late coming home. She had promised she would be back in time, but the hours dragged on, and John grew restless. He tried calling her several times, but there was no answer. His thoughts began to race, but he brushed them off, telling himself it was probably nothing, just a delay at work or a meeting she couldn't get out of. As the night wore on, John decided to make himself a drink to pass the time. He sat in their living room, staring at the empty chair across from him where Lily would normally sit. He had always thought they would grow old together. No secrets, no betrayals. He had no idea that Lily was somewhere, not too far from home, with his brother Mark. When Lily finally arrived, it was nearly 1 a.m. She walked in with a look on her face that John didn't recognize. Guilty, defensive, and avoiding eye contact. John stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't quite place what was wrong, but everything inside him told him that something wasn't right. "I'm sorry I'm late," Lily said, but her voice lacked the usual warmth. There was no kiss, no genuine affection. "I got caught up with some work." John didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked over to their bedroom, grabbed her phone from the nightstand, and checked the screen. It wasn't something he had ever done before, but tonight, something inside him urged him to take a look. As he unlocked the phone, he saw the recent messages. The name that stood out was Mark's, the very brother he had trusted with his life. The messages were short, but the context was clear enough. Mark had left an affectionate note. "I miss you. I'll be home soon." Lily had replied, "Hurry, I can't wait to see you." His heart sank as the pieces started falling into place. John felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The betrayal hit him like a wave, overwhelming him with shock and disbelief. His mind raced, his body trembling as he struggled to comprehend what he was seeing. His own brother. His own flesh and blood. The person he had trusted with his secrets and his life had been in an affair with his wife for years. With the phone still in his hand, John turned slowly to face Lily. She stood there, frozen, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. John didn't say anything at first. The silence between them was deafening, filled only with the unspoken truths that lingered in the air. "I didn't mean for it to happen," Lily finally whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. Her voice trembled as she spoke, but there was no way to deny the truth any longer. "It was a mistake. But it's been going on for years, John, and I've been so confused. I love you, but I love him too." The words hit John harder than any physical blow. His own brother had taken something that was never his to take. The emotional weight of it all was too much to bear. He had always believed that their bond as a family was unbreakable, but now, standing here in the face of this betrayal, John felt like his entire world had crumbled around him. Mark, his brother, the man he trusted more than anyone else, the one person who was supposed to have his back no matter what. How could this happen? How could they both deceive him for so long? John couldn't understand how he had been kept in the dark for all these years, living a lie without even knowing it. Tears stung John's eyes, but he fought them back. He had to remain strong. He had to understand the truth. But the pain, the betrayal, the anger, it was overwhelming. "Why?" John managed to choke out, his voice hoarse. "Why did you do this?" Lily looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "I don't know. I thought I was in love with you. I thought we were happy. But I fell in love with him, and I didn't know how to stop." John felt the weight of her words crushing him. He could no longer look at her the same way. The love he thought he had for her, the life they had built together, was now shattered beyond repair. John couldn't look at Lily anymore. The shock had paralyzed him, and the realization that his wife, the woman he had built his life with, had betrayed him with his own brother was too much to process. His mind was reeling, his heart shattered in a way he didn't know was possible. His thoughts swirled with anger, betrayal, confusion, and a deep sense of loss. He stood in the living room, holding Lily's phone, his hands shaking as the weight of the revelation sank in. Without saying another word, John grabbed his jacket and stormed out of the house. He needed answers, and he wasn't going to find them in the silence of their home. He needed to confront the one person who had betrayed him the most, his brother, Mark. The man who had been his closest confidant, the one person he thought would never let him down. But now, he was the source of all his pain. John drove to Mark's apartment in a daze. The streets seemed to blur as his thoughts consumed him. How had this happened? How could his own brother do this to him? He thought back to all the times Mark had been there. At family gatherings, holidays, birthdays. Every moment had been a lie. Mark had been playing both sides, pretending to be the loving brother while secretly having an affair with his wife. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than anything John had ever experienced. When he arrived at Mark's apartment, he didn't hesitate. He banged on the door, his fists pounding against the wood with a force that mirrored the fury inside him. It took a few moments, but soon the door creaked open, revealing Mark, looking disheveled and tired. His eyes widened in surprise at the sight of John standing there, his expression hard and filled with an anger Mark had never seen before. "John," Mark started, his voice shaky, but John didn't let him finish. His rage boiled over, and he shoved past his brother into the apartment. "Don't you dare John me," John spat, his chest rising and falling with the force of his breaths. "How could you do this to me? How could you do this to your own brother?" His voice cracked with emotion, but there was no stopping it now. "With my wife, Mark? For years? I trusted you. You were supposed to be my family." Mark stood frozen, his face pale as he tried to find the words, but nothing came. He had no defense, no way to explain the unexplainable. Mark's guilt was written all over his face. John could see it in his eyes, the shame, the regret, and the realization that nothing could ever undo what had been done. I didn't mean for it to happen like this," Mark said, his voice trembling. "It started so long ago. I never meant to hurt you, John. I never wanted to betray you. It just happened. I don't know how else to explain it." John's heart was heavy, the words slicing through him like a knife. How? How did it happen? Was I not enough for both of you? Was my love, my trust, my family not enough? His voice wavered, filled with pain. The anger still burned inside him, but now there was a deeper sense of betrayal, of disbelief. Mark reached out as if to touch his brother, but John stepped back, shaking his head. "Don't touch me. Don't come near me. I don't even know who you are anymore." Mark's face crumpled with the weight of his guilt. He looked defeated, his shoulders sagging under the pressure of his actions. "I'm so sorry, John. I wish I could take it all back, but I can't. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I can forgive myself." John took a step back, his hands clenched into fists, his breathing ragged. He wanted to scream, to hit something, but he knew it wouldn't change anything. Nothing could undo the damage that had been done. The bond between him and Mark was broken beyond repair. There would never be a way to go back to the way things were. "This isn't just about forgiveness, Mark," John said, his voice low and cold. "This is about trust, about loyalty. You took everything from me. You took my wife, my family, my brother, and you destroyed it. And for what? For a few stolen moments of pleasure? Was it worth it?" His words cut through the air, leaving a painful silence between them. Mark stood there, speechless, his guilt weighing heavily on him. There was nothing left to say. John turned and walked out of the apartment, leaving Mark standing in the doorway, his heart heavy with regret. As he walked to his car, John felt a mix of emotions: anger, hurt, sadness, but most of all, a deep sense of betrayal. His family was shattered, and nothing would ever be the same again. The next few days felt like an endless blur for John. His emotions, once full of love and trust, now lay in shattered pieces around him, unable to be pieced together. Every corner of the house he had built with Lily seemed to echo with the betrayal. The laughter that once filled the walls now felt distant and foreign. The betrayal wasn't just an affair, it was the collapse of everything he had believed in: his marriage, his family, and his relationship with his brother. How could he go on after all of this? He spent his days in a haze of anger, sadness, and disbelief, trying to hold himself together for the sake of his children. But every time he looked at them, he was reminded of Lily, of everything she had taken from him. The house, once filled with joy, now felt suffocating. He didn't know where to go, where to turn. The pain of betrayal ran deep, and the question that gnawed at him constantly was, how could this happen? Lily tried to reach out to him, but he couldn't bring himself to speak with her. The guilt and shame in her eyes, her desperate attempts to explain her actions, only made things worse. She kept apologizing, begging him to understand that it wasn't what he thought, that she still loved him. But John couldn't find it in himself to listen. Every word she spoke felt like another lie, another justification for what they had both allowed to happen. And Mark, his brother, hadn't made it any easier. The last time they spoke, John had been too angry to even hear him out. He had demanded nothing but space, but he knew deep down that nothing would fix the fracture between them. As the days went by, John tried to focus on the children, putting on a brave face for them. They were confused, unsure of what was happening, why their mother and father weren't speaking, and why their once happy home felt so different. John did his best to maintain some sense of normalcy for them, but deep down, he knew things would never be the same. But the weight of this betrayal didn't just affect John, it also began to weigh heavily on Mark. John's brother had made attempts to reach out, but each time John turned him away. Mark seemed genuinely remorseful, and John could see that the guilt was eating him alive. But there was nothing Mark could do to undo what he had done. The trust was gone. The family bond was severed. For Mark, the reality of what he had destroyed started to settle in. He lost his brother, and with that loss, he realized how precious their relationship had been, and how quickly it had been ruined by his own selfish actions. Mark tried to apologize to Lily, too. She, too, had been living in a state of emotional chaos, trapped in her guilt. She had always known that her affair with Mark was wrong, but she couldn't bring herself to stop. When it first started, it was a spark of excitement, something that made her feel alive again after years of routine. But over time, it became more than that. It became a need, a secret that she carried like a burden, consuming her from within. Now she had lost both her husband and her brother-in-law, and she knew she had no one to blame but herself. As John tried to rebuild his life, he found solace in time alone, in the peace of not having to constantly keep up appearances. He started doing things that made him feel whole again. He picked up his old hobbies, went for long runs, and spent time reflecting on what had been and what was still to come. But healing wasn't something that came overnight. Every time he looked at the family photos that lined the walls, he was reminded of how everything had fallen apart. John knew he had to make a choice, whether to stay in this broken relationship and try to fix what had been shattered, or to walk away, to cut his ties with Lily and Mark, and move forward with his life. It wasn't an easy decision. Part of him still loved Lily, and part of him still wanted the life they once had. But the other part of him, the part that had been betrayed, wasn't sure if he could ever trust her again, or if he could ever forgive his brother. The days felt long and full of uncertainty. John didn't have the answers, and he didn't know if he ever would. But what he did know was this: the life he once knew was gone, and now he had to find a way to build something new, whether with or without the people who had once been his family. As the weeks dragged on, John found himself in a constant battle between his heart and his mind. His emotions were raw, tangled in a web of love, anger, and disbelief. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison, reminding him constantly of the betrayal that had shattered everything. He tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy for the sake of the children, but every moment was a painful reminder of what he had lost. Lily's constant apologies, her desperate attempts to reach him, did nothing but make him feel more trapped. He heard her cries through the walls, saw her heartache in her eyes, but deep down, he knew that the woman standing before him now wasn't the one he had married. The woman who had promised to love him, cherish him, and be loyal to him had chosen his brother over him. That truth was something he couldn't forget, no matter how much Lily begged for forgiveness. Mark, too, had reached out to him several times. At first, John had ignored his calls, his messages, his pleas for a chance to explain himself. But then Mark showed up at John's door one evening, his face drawn with exhaustion and guilt, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "John, please," Mark began, his voice broken, his hands trembling. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I made the biggest mistake of my life. I can't take it back, but I am so, so sorry. I've lost everything that mattered to me. You, my brother, my family. I can't live with this anymore. Please just let me make it right." John stood silently, his heart pounding in his chest. The anger was still there, festering just beneath the surface. But there was something else too, a quiet sadness. His brother was broken, and part of him could feel that. Yet, how could he ever forgive him? How could he ever trust someone who had taken everything from him? "Mark," John said, his voice flat, drained of any emotion. "How do you expect me to just forget this? You didn't just betray me. You destroyed my family. You took away my wife, my trust, and everything I thought was real. I can't just move past that. You can't fix it. You can't undo what you've done." Mark lowered his gaze, the weight of John's words sinking deep into him. There was nothing he could say to make it right. There was no excuse for his actions, no justification for what he had done. He had made a decision that had ruined not only his life but also his brother's. For a long moment, the two men stood in silence. Finally, Mark spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "I understand. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even forgive myself. I just wanted you to know how truly sorry I am. I'll leave, John. I'll stay out of your life, out of your family's life. I'll take whatever consequences come my way." John's heart ached as he watched his brother, the man he had once called his closest friend, walk away. There was no sense of victory in his heart, no satisfaction in knowing he had stood his ground. He just felt empty, hollow. He didn't know if he had made the right decision. Walking away from Mark, from the relationship that had defined much of his life, left a gaping hole in his soul. But there was also another part of John that knew he had to move forward. As painful as it was, he couldn't keep living in the past. His marriage with Lily was beyond repair, and his relationship with Mark, though once deep, was now irrevocably broken. He had been betrayed by the two people he loved the most, but in the end, it wasn't about them anymore. It was about him. John made the painful decision to move out of the house. He knew it was time for him to start over. He didn't have all the answers, and he didn't know what his future held, but he knew one thing. He had to find a way to heal, to rediscover who he was outside of the man who had been betrayed. Lily tried to stop him, to convince him to stay, but John knew that for his own peace of mind, he couldn't stay in a place that reminded him of everything that had been taken from him. The decision was final. In the days that followed, John began the process of rebuilding his life. He found a new place to live, a small apartment where he could start fresh. It wasn't easy and it wasn't quick, but little by little, he started to reclaim his identity, to rediscover his own worth. The pain was still there, but it didn't consume him the way it had in the beginning. With each passing day, he found more strength in letting go of the past and focusing on the future. John didn't know what would come next, but he was ready to find peace again. He would never forget the betrayal, but he would not let it define him any longer. It was time for a new chapter.